Hi, everyone. Welcome to Earthfiles webcast on YouTube. This is February 28th, 2018, the last day of this month in a year that seems to be speeding even faster than last year with more and more news. I can't tell myself whether I am more entertained now by the news and the 6 o'clock news or what I'm getting in emails, videotapes, phone calls from people out there in the world everywhere now who seem to have information about something that falls into the category of an alien presence. I have never received such a stream of information, and a lot of it seems to be coming from people who actually can prove who they are. Now, 20 years ago, in April of 1998, I received a phone call from a California resident who said he was an acquaintance of a man whose father-in-law had worked for the Central Intelligence Agency in the late 1950s, and his work included ET and UFO investigations for the CIA. The caller thought that I should talk with the son-in-law to see if I could speak with the then 62-year-old father-in-law living in the southeastern United States, whose health was deteriorating with severe diabetes. After the son-in-law's and my first conversation, he called me back with a phone number to his father-in-law, who is retired and living with his wife in Florida. On May 2nd, 1998, I dialed the number of the former CIA analyst and U.S. Army cryptographer, who is featured in huge detail in my 20-part series at Earthfiles, in which I use two different names, Stein, S-T-E-I-N, and Cooper, spelled K-E-W-P-E-R, both names that he recommended that I use. I have never, ever used his real name. Now, for those familiar with the May 2013 citizens hearing at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where I and some of my colleagues presented hard evidentiary material, whether in my case it had to do with medical and veterinarian on animal mutilations, or what we were investigating in crop formations, or material from the human abduction syndrome. There was a tremendous amount of material presented at that 2013 citizens hearing, and one of the video clips was referred to as anonymous. Anonymous is one and the same as my 1998 CIA source that I've called Stein Cooper. Now, soon after my first phone conversation with Cooper Stein in early May 1998 from my Philadelphia office to his southern Florida home, he got a call from a longtime friend of his who worked for the phone company in his Florida hometown. The friend told Cooper Stein that his phone was tapped. He got this notice, he found it out inside of the phone company. And he called up Stein, who was ill, and said, "What are you doing? Why should you be being tapped officially?" And that the original source of the tap that was confirmed by his manager friend in the local phone company was Wackenhut. And Wackenhut is famous for working for the CIA and other alphabet agencies. Well, Stein called me up to let me know that he now had a confirmation that his phone was tapped on one conversation. We had one phone conversation. And in one phone conversation, we were tapped, which meant what I've always known, I'm tapped all the time. So they were tapping me, and that's how they came to tap him. He concluded the same thing. So he said that he was extremely concerned that he wasn't going to live much longer, and that he really wanted his experiences to be documented for posterity, and he wanted to know if I would be willing to fly down to Florida and I could spend 2 or 3 days at the home he shared with his wife, meet his son, his family, and that he had documents, he had newspapers, he had all kinds of things from the 50s that he could share with me, and that his wife would help put out in order, so that I, as an investigative reporter, would know that I am working with a family in which the military records and photographs and all kinds of documentation would be there to support everything that he was telling me. I flew down there. They showed me everything that he said he had. I was dealing with a real person who, in terms of the public world, would have been U.S. Army crypto analyst teaching cryptography in a southeastern military base that he made me promise that I would never reveal because, amazingly, as we have gone into the 21st century, that base from the 1950s, when he was working on UFOs and ETs for the Central Intelligence Agency out of Langley at the headquarters in Virginia, and that the office building that they used was a few stories high, in which the upper story or two were totally windowless. So nobody could ever look in with binoculars or telescopes. And it was in that floor on this particular military base that the CIA had this building in which this was their work. Investigations of UFOs and ETs through photographs, through film, because we're talking about the 50s, 16 millimeter film, forensic evidence, all kinds of artifacts, and autopsy footage. Autopsy footage from Wright-Patterson, autopsy footage from other locations on beings that were not human. He said to me that his boss worked out of Langley, CIA, and that his real name was Anthony Barden, B-A-R-D-E-N, but that he doubted that I would ever be able to find the man even through his real name, because the CIA is so thorough in cloaking people who work in the agency, especially those that are managers and directors. And he said that one of the films that he and his group down in the southeastern military base watched one day as part of their assignment having to do with studying autopsies that were being done on non-human bodies. He said one of the films was of a six-fingered humanoid, and that with the six-fingered humanoid, there were panels with six-fingered hands embedded in those panels, and that the source of this film that was allegedly taken in a tent at a location site southwest of Socorro, New Mexico, between May 31st and June 2nd of 1947. That is a full month before the July 2 to 4, 1947 crash retrievals in the Roswell region. Kewper Stein told me that along with the six-fingered hand-imprinted panels were hieroglyphs that reminded him of Egypt, and they referred to them as alien symbols inside the craft and somewhere in proximity to these hand-imprinted panels. He said that in the spring of 1959, that he and his CIA boss, Anthony Barden, were asked to brief President Dwight Eisenhower and Vice President Richard Nixon in Washington, D.C. At the time, Eisenhower had Nixon working on what they called the real CIA Project Blue Book cases of UFOs and alien beings. And both the president and the vice president were getting briefings, as President Truman had on a regular basis, about an alien presence on this planet that was known during World War II and in a variety of crashes around the world after the war ended. And that Nixon and Eisenhower talked to each other very straightforwardly about the fact that the Project Blue Book that was presented out to the public was totally nonsense. Nonsense on purpose. And that they had a real Project Blue Book using the same name, which is one of the ways that intelligences cover up classified and highly classified special access projects. They can have 2, 3, same name. Blue Book, Blue Book, Blue Book. But only the people who have the SAP access to the real Project Blue Book in the real Langley, in the real Andrews Air Force Base, in wherever the real offices are, they have access through letters and numbers and code. And so that means that everything that we heard about Project Blue Book in the media and the public going into the 60s and then it being dismissed, no, the Air Force said there was nothing to it. That was just all a cover. This was just all window dressing. Go away, public. Go away, media. There's nothing here. While meanwhile, they're having entire buildings working for the CIA on a military base where they are screening autopsies of non-humans. They are looking at film. They are looking at photographs, and they are studying artifacts. Well, one of the things that all of this discussion with Cooper Stein reminds me to stress with you was a discussion that I had with Len Stringfield back in the 1980s. And it had to do with why crashes. It makes no sense. If we're dealing with advanced intelligences, whether they are androids, whether they're hybrids, whether they're cyborgs, whatever they are, why would they be on Earth in advanced craft that would crash? Len Stringfield told me that he was in the Air Force and that back in the early 1950s, that he knew for a fact there was a standing order to shoot down UFOs. This was an American order. And that Len told me, and this is a quote, "Linda, we lost so many men trying to carry out that order that it was rescinded by the middle 1950s. He also told me that none of the families of the pilots killed in encounters with UFOs were ever told the truth. Stories were made up to console the families. But Len Stringfield raised this question with me. Was there UFO aggression because of human aggression against UFOs? Or was there some inherent hostility between the occupants of the UFOs and humans? Or were there different types of beings that had different agendas on Earth with humans and other Earth life? There was genuine confusion about motives and agendas then, after World War II, in the 1950s, going into the 1960s, just as there is still today in 2018. But I'm talking about this tonight on my Earthfiles YouTube channel because tomorrow night, Thursday to Friday, March 1, going past midnight into March 2, I'm going to be doing my 3-hour broadcast on Coast to Coast AM. And it is such a special first 2 hours. I've been working with dark journalist Daniel List on an amazing interview that he did only a couple of weeks ago with a man named Robert Merritt. Merritt was hired by the Nixon White House in the early 1970s to be a covert agent for a top secret White House intelligence unit called the Houston Plan, spelled Huston Plan. Robert Merritt was born in West Virginia on June 27, 1944. So in June of 1972, when Nixon was president before the Watergate break-in, Robert Merritt was 28 years old. Because he was a good-looking young blonde guy, Nixon's Houston Plan operatives hired Merritt to covertly interact with people in Congress and other positions of power in order to photograph and film and tape compromising information that President Nixon could use in blackmail for political manipulation. Robert Merritt did his work so well that in the critical time period of June to July of 1972, before and after the Watergate break-in, President Nixon held 3 secret meetings with Robert Merritt deep below the White House, culminating with the third and the last meeting after the June 17, 1972 Watergate break-in. Now, as we are at the beginning of 2018, Robert Merritt has been diagnosed with a lethal cancer, according to his doctors, and has a limited time to live. Through the help of their mutual friend, attorney Douglas Caddy, Robert Merritt asked dark journalist Daniel List to do an historic, groundbreaking interview to document Robert Merritt's first ever on-the-record description of those 3 secret meetings that he had with President Nixon that included discussion of, quote, an advanced being from outer space, close quote. It was in the 3rd meeting after the Watergate break-in that President Nixon read out loud to Robert Merritt Nixon's letter to the American people about the advanced being from somewhere else in this universe, or perhaps even a different universe. Those are Robert Merritt's words, remembering what Richard Nixon read from Richard Nixon's own handwritten letter. The president explained to Robert Merritt, as his covert operative in the Houston plan, that the United States government had, quote, in protection, seemed to want to stress that this advanced being was not in captivity, but was, quote, in protection, close quote, and that this advanced being was teaching some scientists vast quantities of powerful information about physical laws and an equation written in red ink in 2 lines, copied neatly in this material that Richard Nixon was quoting from to Robert Merritt. And that the president said that the equation could help all of humanity or could destroy all of humanity. What I would like to urge all of you tonight on this webcast is tune in, if you can, for the live 3 hours that I do on Coast to Coast tomorrow, starting at 11 p.m. Pacific, midnight Mountain, 1 a.m. Central, and 2 a.m. East Coast. And here I think it's one of the most extraordinary interviews that I've ever done. I have excerpts from Daniel List and from Robert Merritt in his own words about his interactions with President Nixon. And I would also like to urge all of you, if you can, to go to my Earthfiles.com website and put in the quick search at the upper left the word Stein, S-T-E-I-N. It will bring up my 20-part series that I did with the man I call Cooper Stein, that is now even more relevant to our understanding about an, quote, advanced being that Richard Nixon talked about with Robert Merritt as being kept with scientists at Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico, and had also apparently done work at Area 51 underground. And as Robert Merritt says, President Richard Nixon stressed in the letter that he read to Robert Merritt that he was sharing this letter to the American people with only 2 human beings besides him, the president. One, Robert Merritt, that he read the letter to. Second, private communication sealed, along with 2 audio cassettes that were to be hand delivered by Robert Merritt to Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State with Nixon, who was the one person that Richard Nixon said that he trusted the most. Richard Nixon passed. Henry Kissinger is still alive. Robert Merritt is still alive. What we, Daniel List, I, and others working on this extraordinary story, hope is that soon we will be able to announce that what Nixon wrote in that letter that he read to Robert Merritt, this is what Robert Merritt would like to have happen. He would like it to be read at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and then displayed for all of the world to read Richard Nixon's handwriting about an advanced being from someplace in this universe or perhaps another universe as it was described through Robert Merritt. So we may, in the next 2 or 3 weeks, be able to follow this up with showing this letter that we refer to as a time capsule, and that Richard Nixon described for Robert Merritt back in 1972 exactly how he was going to hide in plain sight in a public part of the White House his time capsule letter for the American people about the advanced being from someplace else in the universe. So stay tuned to Earthfiles, my YouTube webcast, to earthfiles.com that I am trying to update every day, and know that this coming weekend, March 3rd to 4th, we are going to unveil the new version of earthfiles.com, now in WordPress, that will be more compatible with iPhones, iPads, and digital material, so that all of you can hopefully share in with me what I think is one of the most exciting times ever to be alive. And that is, we are on that intersection right now, where everywhere we turn these days are the indications that powers that be are trying to open up this huge truth that we're not alone in this universe, and it should never have been denied to any of us ever. Thank you for being here for this night before I do tomorrow night on Coast and upcoming new reports about this. And I think we have time for me to take a couple of questions, and I always enjoy very much learning what's on your mind.
Great. So a lot of people want to know where the cats are tonight.
Oh, well, I try not to corral them. It's better I don't. And sometimes they're here and I just pick them up. So maybe they'll come wandering in. They're independent cats.
We have 3 people to thank for their awesome super chats. Thank you, Nancy Volker. Thank you, Respirgu and M. Throckmorton. You could make your names a little bit easier for me, but thank you so much.
Thank you very
so
much.
A question. How do you think Jim Mars would have responded to the recently released videos of the UFO UAPs had he still been with us?
Oh, it's a great question. Jim Mars and we met around animal mutilations all the way back at the end of the 1980s and became very good friends. And Jim was one of the most astute and perceptive people I've ever known in my life. And you could not raise up much gauze or deflection in front of Jim. He could always see through everything. And I think that what he would have said is the same kind of sadness mixed with irritation that I feel. And that is that the New York Times and the Washington Post putting those infrared gun camera images and the video above the fold on December 16th and December 18th. It was exciting. It was real. These were not made up. There's no question about the fact that these do have chain of custody back to Commander Fravor and to the two pilots who have remained unidentified. But Eric Davis, who works with Hal Puthoff at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, was willing to do 2 hours of Phenomena Radio with John Burroughs and me about 3 weeks ago, explaining that these videotapes really were and are as they were described, and that the Luis Elizondo Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program was on the 5th floor in the C ring of the Pentagon between 2007 to 2012. But the part that Jim and I and others feel some would feel, and I'm saying I feel, is that we all were hoping that there would be immediate follow-up with more videos. We were told that there would be more videos, and now we're turning to March 1st tomorrow, and there has not been videotape follow-up. Maybe there will be. I've heard that there are some waiting in the wings. But as everyone knows, and Jim Marrs especially knew, that when it comes to trying to get out facts and the truth about a subject that seems to me should be the birthright of every Homo sapien sapien on planet Earth. What are the facts about other life in this universe? What are the facts about alien intelligences that come and go here? What are the facts about an alien presence as it has been discussed and described at least since the time of John F. Kennedy? And that if it's always drop something tantalizing, but no follow-up, no inertia, no expansion of the data, no expansion of we're now going to start sharing more and more and more with you so you will begin to understand how complex all of this is, how we are dealing with a story as big as 270 million years ago on this planet, evolving through genetic manipulation and creation of standing up primates, and that today, whatever is the truth about agendas, friendly, unfriendly, that we should be in a government of, by, and for the people that is never afraid to tell us, without worrying about other nations on the planet, that should never be afraid to tell us the truth. But instead, what seems to be becoming clearer and clearer is that even the concept of a government of, by, and for the people becomes a threat to national security if everything that is of the highest classification of confidentiality and secrecy is to be hidden. They're opposites. A government of, by, and for the people should know all about other life in the universe. If our government representatives know about other life in the universe. So to have policies of denial and policies of lies since World War II is a direct opposition. It's contradictory to, it's the opposite of what the nature of our government is supposed to be. That's what Jim Marrs and I sat talking on his big deck once upon a time. We were both talking about exactly this issue, that throughout the history of this planet there have been various types of government, and that the American experiment beginning in 1776, now in 2018, that the vitality of the concept, a government of, by, and for the people, in which the government is the representative, not the controller, not the marauder, not the assassin, not the unit that looks at the people as a threat to national security concerns. And I think that's part of this strange intersection that we're in. There is the excitement that we could go forward and we could tell the truth and everybody would know about what? That we're not alone in the universe. Why should that ever have been the biggest secret on this planet for thousands of years? What is at stake behind that fact? That's what I'm trying to understand. That's what I'm trying to bring in my reports here at Earthfiles.com, at Coast, at Phenomena Radio, Ancient Aliens, and everything I'm doing. That's what I'm trying to understand, and always trying to bring you the pressure of fact, and hope that you'll keep joining me and expanding. Thank you very much.